Welcome in, everybody. It is Monday Morning MotoGP, and we are talking about the French Grand Prix that happened this last weekend in LeMans. If you don't know, this is a live podcast, broadcast here on TikTok Live, 10 a.m. Pacific time, every Monday after every Grand Prix this season. And then if you miss it, if you're not lucky enough to be here for the live broadcast, we do repost the podcast in its entirety on YouTube. So make sure to check that out. Thank you, as always, for the likes, the shares, the follows, the subscribes, all that good stuff. Help us grow here on TikTok and on YouTube as well. And a little announcement: the horsepowerrodeo.com website is up and running with brand new articles, including an article on whether or not Marc Marquez is too good to have the best bike on the grid. That really stirred the pot on Reddit, so hopefully you can go check that out at horsepowerrodeo.com. In the chat, we have somebody that says Horsepower Rodeo on Spotify. I have given up on Spotify because it is a terrible frickin' platform. And they don't like when I import audio from other sources. And they wouldn't let me post the Monday Morning MotoGP podcast on Spotify. So now the only place you can find Monday Morning MotoGP is right here on TikTok Live and on YouTube. So make sure you're subscribing over there on YouTube. So today we have a bunch of stuff to talk about. We're not going to do a French recap. If you want to look and see what happened at the French Grand Prix, that is available on a video on TikTok and on YouTube. You can check it out. It's one of my latest videos. It talks all about the stuff that happened this weekend. But what we're going to talk about today is a little bit different. We are going to talk about the decision that Ducati has to make that revolves around who's going to be riding that big, fat, factory red bike when it comes to 2025. We're also going to be talking about why it seems that KTM's Johan Zarco has seemed to mature beyond his years in such a very, very short time. Also, why are some Moto2 riders only considered for some rides? Why do we only talk about this Moto2 rider has this opening at this team? Why don't we talk about in a broader sense that the best racers in Moto2 get to go to MotoGP? And finally, we're going to talk about why the India Grand Prix might be in jeopardy of not happening at all in 2024. So let's jump right into it. We have factory Ducati having to make a hell of a decision between Marc Marquez, Enea Bastianini, and Jorge Martin on who gets that ride next to Pecco Bagnaia, because all of them are kind of at the top of their game. I know Enea wasn't really in the conversation when it came to the very last laps of the French Grand Prix, but he did finish fourth. He is fourth in the World Championship, tied with Marc Marquez on points. So he is right there. It's not like his form has fallen off a cliff and he doesn't still deserve to kind of be in this conversation. But let's just get the stuff out of the way. I think Enea Bastianini staying in that factory seat, even if it's deserved, is kind of the most boring move that Ducati could make. I'm not saying Enea is a boring rider, but as far as headlines and new blood and things like that, staying with him as the factory rider isn't an exciting headline-grabbing thing. It was exciting when Yamaha said, hey, we're bringing back Fabio. Like, that was a very unexpected. No one expected Yamaha to be able to retain Fabio Quartararo, and they were. That was an exciting headline. They were able to put that out. Think about the same with Ducati. If Ducati came out tomorrow and said, guys, we're going with Enea Bastianini to ride our factory bike next year, it doesn't grab us. It doesn't pull us in. I think for Enea to keep that factory seat, he would have had to burn the barn to the ground this year with his form. He would have had to have been far away the best choice. That was the story behind Enea Bastianini. If he was able to come in and under the pressure of Jorge Martin and under the pressure of Marc Marquez in the first 5 races, just light the world ablaze, then I think we would be talking about Enea Bastianini getting that seat or retaining that seat he has next to Pecco Bagnaia. I don't see it happening unless he just goes on a run of form that is undeniable. But the guy on that run of form that's undeniable is Jorge Martin. Jorge Martin says, listen, I think I've done everything I can to prove to Ducati that I'm the best person for that factory bike. And in that instance, I think he's right. I don't think if he had a sudden dip in form, he had a little slump, he had a couple crashes, I don't think that really affects the Ducati decision at this point, because the guy has proven week after week he's fast. He's fast over 1 lap. He has fast race pace. He has good race craft. He has all the tools he needs to compete at the highest level in MotoGP. I don't think him just having another good week or another bad week really says much about the whole of whether or not he deserves to be on the factory Ducati. I think Jorge Martin deserves to be there because of his resume, because of what he's been able to do. Runner-up last year on a satellite Ducati team. I think people underestimate what that means. Not a factory team was fighting for the world title, a satellite team rider. The satellite team, the independent team last year, won the team's title with him on board. That doesn't happen very often. So I think Jorge's right when he says, I've done everything I can do to earn this seat, and now it's up to the decision makers. And they do have a decision to make, because Marc Marquez is making his point. He's being competitive. It is not normal to come from 13th on the grid and be on the podium. We've seen people come from very far back and do very well. We saw Brad Binder go from 15th to 1st in a sprint race, but he wasn't able to repeat that on the Sunday after. He had a really, really good start. He got to the front, was very racy, did a great job. So when Marc Marquez goes from 13th to 2nd in the sprint, I think all of us were thinking, wow, it's a heck of a race. Great start. I doubt he can do that again. Even Marc said, boy, doing that tomorrow is going to be very, very difficult. And then he does it again. So he's making his case very loud and clear. I think I should be on that factory Ducati next to Pecco Bagnaia. He thinks he deserves it. He thinks he's still riding at the caliber, at his form, that he feels like I deserve the factory seat. Is he wrong? I think we have a situation where neither of these riders are wrong in their claim. I think Marc Marquez is fully able to claim, I think I'm the best rider for that bike. I think I could bring a title to Ducati with that bike. I think Jorge Martin is completely right when he says, hey, I've done everything I can do to prove to Ducati that I'm the right man for the bike. So when they're both right, how do you make the decision? How does Ducati make this decision and put the right person in that bike? And I think Simon Crafar hit the nail on the head this weekend in the commentary box. He said, as a team, from a team perspective, you're thinking about a lot of things. You're thinking about selling motorcycles. You're thinking about corporate infrastructure. You're thinking about marketing. You're thinking about budgeting. You're thinking about all these things, sponsorship. There's a lot more that goes into this decision than who's the best rider. I wish it wasn't that way. I wish they would just put the best riders and give them all the rewards they had, and look, and there's a little matrix and we can make these decisions really easily. That's not how the world works. There's lots and lots of puzzle pieces to fit together to figure out who gets these rides. And it's not as simple as who's the best rider now, who's the best rider historically. I mean, look at some of the moves that have happened historically where title contenders were moved from the seats that they won titles on. Riders got sick of riding at the factory they were at and moved on. There's so many factors. So how does a team like Ducati weed through all of that? Now I go back to a point I'm just making about selling motorcycles. These manufacturers compete in MotoGP, yes, to win titles, yes, for the notoriety, but they're there to sell the motorcycles. And one thing I think us as viewers and fans forget is that that's the business they're in. And so when you have a rider like Jorge Martin that comes out and says, I am the best rider, I am very confident in my abilities, I deserve the factory bike, give me the factory bike because I am so great. Jorge Martin has not been shy at saying how good he is and how much he deserves that seat and how much he wants it. He's been very, very brash to go, hey, I know what I want, I need it, give it to me, Ducati. You have to remember Ducati's in the business of selling motorcycles. So having a rider that is just going, hey, we're winning because I'm great, goes against the point of the fact that they also have a great machine. Not saying that Jorge Martin has never been complimentary of the bike or of his machine, but think about the two perspectives. Think about the Valentino Rossi thing at Honda. Honda says, hey, we're winning because we have a Honda. And Valentino Rossi is saying, Honda's winning because they have a me. That's why Rossi left and went to Yamaha and said, hey, look, I can win over here too. So it's always been this push-pull between manufacturers and riders. Manufacturers are saying, hey, we're at the top because we have the best bike. Yes, we've put good riders on it, but we're at the top because the bike is amazing. They have to say that. They're trying to sell the motorcycle. It's not a dig at the rider. It's not that they hate riders. Ducati marketing is trying to sell Ducatis to me. They're trying to sell me a Ducati by telling me, look, this is the best bike in MotoGP. It's the best bike in World Superbike. It's the best bike on the street. Come buy one. So when you have someone like Jorge Martin saying, well, we're at the top because I'm number one, it goes against that message. So yes, while I prefer riders that are a little more humble, a little more understated, I like confidence, but it does kind of bleed into brashness with Jorge. That's one of his issues. That could be an issue that keeps him off that factory bike. So there's a lot of decisions to be made. But what Simon Crafar said this weekend, from a team's perspective, from a selling perspective, Marc Marquez is the obvious choice. He's the most marketable rider in MotoGP. He's the most popular rider in MotoGP. He's the one that's kind of transcending the sport at this moment. He's the famous one. You put him on the red bike, you're going to get headlines. Headlines follow Marc Marquez around. The paparazzi follow Marc Marquez around. He's a world superstar. So from a team perspective, from Ducati, Lenovo, factory team Ducati, it makes a ton of sense to go, hey, let's put Marc Marquez next to Pecco Bagnaia. They are two very different human beings. Let's put them together, and that will make headlines. Just the conflict within the team, the history of VR46 versus Marc Marquez, that's going to get headlines. From a rider perspective, we have a young, hungry rider who has proved himself. From a rider perspective, this is a point Simon made that I'm just kind of parroting here. From a rider perspective, Jorge Martin is the obvious choice for that factory Ducati seat. So you have the team perspective that kind of says Marc Marquez is the most marketable choice and also a hell of a rider on a hell of a bike. And then we have from the rider perspective, Jorge Martin. And that's what Ducati is going to have to weed through of what they are going to choose between the two of them. Now, I have a third perspective, which is what gives us the best story to tell. Looking back, what is the best historical story? I'm a screenwriter. That's the way I think. I think about what is the craziest story we can tell. And I'm a little bit of a conspiracy theorist in this sort of sense. So I like causing a little bit of chaos, agent of chaos in MotoGP. That's what I am. So before we get into what my perspective is, I want to talk a little bit about whether or not Marc Marquez cares if he's on the red bike, or does he just want the latest bike? Because that has been his quote. He said, listen, I think I have shown enough to deserve the latest spec bike. Meaning, this year would be the 2024 and next year would be the 2025. He doesn't want to be on a year-old machine next year. He's said that very plainly. He didn't say, I want to be on the red one. He said, I want the latest spec. Because I think at this point in Marc Marquez's career, he's already had the notoriety of being a full-fledged factory rider. He wants to win that 9th and 10th world title. He thinks he can do that on any team as long as he has the latest equipment. So for Marc Marquez, maybe it's not as important for that red bike. Maybe for Marc Marquez, he's happy at Gresini. He's happy to move to Pramac as long as he's getting that latest spec motorcycle. Whereas Jorge Martin hasn't had the notoriety of being on that red bike. So is the negotiation behind the scenes at Ducati like, listen, let's put Jorge Martin on the red bike. Keep him with Ducati, not let him escape to Aprilia or Yamaha or somewhere else, KTM, wherever it would be. Let's keep Jorge Martin happy, put him on that red bike next to Pecco, and then let's give Gresini Ducati one of the 2025 machines, or let's move Marc into the Pramac racing program, get him one of those 2025 bikes so he can compete, and let's keep them both happy because what they want might be slightly different, even though on the surface it seems very, very similar. That may be the best way to keep all of these riders in the Ducati family happy. Now that is a lot of ifs, ands, or buts because we don't know, is Pramac Ducati going to be Pramac Ducati next year, or are they going to be Pramac Yamaha? We don't know. Yamaha's putting up a fight to get a team, a satellite team in MotoGP. They're fighting very hard to do that. We'll see if they can succeed. But I do think one of the best ways for them to keep all these really, really talented riders is to look at Marc and say, we will give you the 2025 machine, we just can't give you the factory ride. We will give you the machine you want, we will give you the support you want, and we will hope that you can compete for a world title in 2025 on the latest spec bike. The same bike that Pecco will have, the same bike that Jorge Martin would have if they gave him the factory nod, and possibly the same bike that Firmin Aldeguer will have if he moves into the Pramac Ducati garage. That's one way to try to keep everyone happy with what they want. Because I do think, just to repeat, I do think what Jorge Martin wants is a little different than what Marc Marquez wants. Jorge Martin, his trajectory is like this. It's going up. He's a young guy. He's a hungry guy. He wants that factory seat. He wants to wear the red jumpsuit. Marc Marquez, that's a little less important than having the latest factory bike. So let's move on and talk about Johan Zarco. I don't want to talk about it a lot. Obviously, Honda is in a really tough spot right now in MotoGP. They're struggling very, very much. They're trying to get their feet underneath them. But the one thing I do want to comment on is Johan Zarco and the maturity and the attitude he has toward this Honda project versus the attitude he had for the KTM project. Now, if you don't know, a handful of years ago, Johan Zarco was riding for, I think it was a satellite Yamaha team. He makes the move over to factory KTM. And I think the wisdom was that he was going to go over there. He was always a very talented rider on the Yamaha. He was going to go over there to factory KTM, help elevate that team to compete for a world title. He was their Brad Binder before they got their Brad Binder. Maybe he was even at the same time as Brad Binder. I can't remember exactly which way it came in. But that was a disaster. Johan Zarco came into that KTM. He hated the bike. He hated the team. He hated life. Every time they cut to that KTM garage, he had what I called the Johan Zarco grumpy face on. Like, he was miserable at KTM. So miserable, in fact, he was vocal about how bad the motorcycle was. He was vocal about how much fun he was not having. And he left that contract, that 2-year contract, he left 6 months in. He would rather have ride no motorcycle. He would rather ride no motorcycle than ride the KTM back then. So a lot of people were reminding him of that fact when he was moving from Ducati, where he was very happy, where he was competitive. He won his first MotoGP race. People were warning him, going, hey, you going over to Honda is going to be a KTM Part 2. It's going to be very, very frustrating. You're going to get upset with it. You're going to quit. Now, looking into the garage right now, we see Johan Zarco is a very different character than he was at KTM. It's only been a handful of years later, about 3 years later. And Johan Zarco seems to enjoy life at Honda. He knows it's a very big mountain to climb. They have a lot of work in front of them. He has not been successful on that Honda. He's not been able to push without crashing. There's a lot going on over there. They haven't exactly found their way. But talking to Johan Zarco, he feels so much more even. He feels so much more measured, so much more mature than he was just a few years ago. And it's actually nice to see. He's not there complaining. He's not saying, Honda. He even came out in the media a week or two ago and said, this isn't the time to be skeptical at Honda. This is the time to really try new things. We're at this drawing board phase where we could go one of any direction, and we have to understand who we are, what we are, and where we're at. That is an incredibly mature attitude from a racer who wants to compete. I mean, this guy finally got his first MotoGP win. He wants to win. He wants to be at the top. And it's not going to happen overnight at Honda. Everyone knows this. So what is the difference in Johan Zarco? We can say it's maturity, but it's only been 3 years since he had that disaster at KTM. So what is the difference? I think the difference is really one of perspective and anticipation and expectation. Expectation screws everything up. It screws your happiness up. When you're expecting one thing and you don't get it, it makes you very unhappy. When you're not expecting something and then you get it, it makes you very happy. I think when Johan Zarco went to KTM, he was expecting that this was the move in his career that would put him on the map, that would put him in the world title fight, and it didn't happen, and that was very upsetting. Not only did it not happen, was he not competing for a world title, he wasn't competing anywhere. He was terrible on the KTM. And I think that expectation, that fall, was too much for him to deal with. He went in there with all the hopes and dreams in the world to be competitive and make KTM a champion, and it just exploded, imploded, whatever you want to say about it. It did not work out. When he's going over to Honda now, he's older, he's closer to retirement age, he's thinking about the future past motorcycle riding, I'm sure. He's going over to Honda with a very different set of expectations, which means any positive results are going to be positive. Anything good that happens, he can take something from it, he can learn from it, he can enjoy life with it, because he's not expecting himself to be at the top. He's not putting that pressure on himself. So if Honda gets a top 10, that's a bonus. He's just there to develop a bike and help them get back to the top. And will they get back to the top while he's there? We don't know. Probably not. I think it's a long, long road for Honda. I think Johan Zarco is a great rider who can give them a lot of valuable information, much like Dovizioso in Ducati. Like a lot of people like to say, he wasn't an alien. He wasn't this crazy high level of rider, but such a talented, competent rider that could give really good feedback on the bike that helped build that Ducati for the next generation of Ducati riders who are now reaping all the benefits of all Andrea Dovizioso's work. I think that's very possible for Johan Zarco to build this motorcycle into something that's amazing that the next generation of Honda riders wins championships on. At least that's what they're hoping, that's what he's hoping. But he doesn't have the expectations of himself to win a world championship. He's now a MotoGP winner. He's a MotoGP podium finisher. He's accomplished a lot of things that not every motorcycle racer can accomplish. And seeing him this week at the French Grand Prix, you saw how happy he was just to be there in that atmosphere, throwing his knee sliders and his gloves into the audience, into the crowd after the race. He was happy to be there. So I think the change of expectations are really the thing that is carrying the day for Johan Zarco. And it's actually good to see, because no one wants to see ever again the Johan Zarco KTM grumpy face at all. So talking about the future of Honda, the future of motorsports, let's talk a little bit of Moto2. I know this is a MotoGP podcast, but you can't have MotoGP without having a feeder series that gives us the superstars of tomorrow. We've talked a lot this year about Fermin Aldeguer and his move to Ducati. We've talked this year a lot about Joe Roberts being the American in Moto2 that possibly has a seat carved out for him at Trackhouse Racing. Well, I want to talk about another Moto2 rider that is making waves in ways that are kind of, and doing it in an unexpected way. And that's this guy on the hat, Ai Ogura. If you don't know a little bit about his history, Ai Ogura came up from Moto3 on Honda Team Asia, went into the Moto2 team with Honda Team Asia, had some success, fought for a world title. If it wasn't for a crash or two a few years back, he might have won the world title. And then he had a horrible training accident before last season, did not have a good season last year. I think a lot of people expected him that last year maybe to be a title contending year yet again, maybe be fighting for a seat in MotoGP. It didn't happen. He was injured. He leaves Honda Team Asia for the speed-up chassis, for the Boscoscura, for the empty helmet squad, and no one knew how that was going to work out. Also, we have a new tire era in Moto2. The Pirellis come in and replace Dunlop. It's just a lot of changes going on in Moto2, and no one really knew where to put this guy in the picture. Right from the beginning, we knew Fermin Aldeguer, not Fabio. We knew Fermin Aldeguer was moving to Ducati very early on. That deal happened over the winter break. Joe Roberts has seemed to take to the Pirelli tires like a fish to water. He seems to understand how to handle those tires. He's been in the top 10 all year long, second in the championship. He's killing it. Ai Ogura hasn't really shown the pace in qualifying. He hasn't showed that one-lap speed on the Pirellis or with the new Boscoscura chassis. But on race day, this kid shows up to play. We've had 5 rounds in the Moto2 World Championship. He's qualified pretty terribly in all 5 rounds. But on race day, this kid has made up 47 grid positions on Sunday. 47. This last Sunday, he qualified, I think it was 17th. He was 17th on the grid in the Moto2 race in France. Finishes second. Tore through the entire field. So, is he in the conversation for a MotoGP seat? Well, historically, some seats are kind of predestined, if you want to say it. When you look at the KTM seat, Pedro Acosta, his seat at the KTM table was kind of predestined unless KTM screwed up and he wanted to leave voluntarily. He's been in this KTM program for a very long time. KTM was where he was going to race in MotoGP if there was a seat available, and they made sure there was a seat available. With Ai Ogura, with these Asian riders, especially the Japanese riders, they're kind of predestined for that Honda Team Asia Idemitsu Honda ride, that LCR Idemitsu Honda ride that Taka Nakagami has right now. And so for the last few years, the question has become, when does Taka step aside and when does another rider, namely Ai Ogura, move into that seat at factory Honda? It didn't seem like last year was a good time. Again, Ai Ogura was coming off an injury. He wasn't that successful in the Moto2 World Championship, and Honda is trying to build a bike from scratch. They have a bike that is very difficult to ride. As soon as you start pushing, the bike kind of crashes. They've had a lot of crashes, a lot of fallers. Marc Marquez and Joan Mir couldn't stay on the thing last year. So putting a rookie on that machine didn't seem like it made a lot of sense to anyone, especially because his performance in Moto2 didn't really warrant it. Well, now we have this kid tearing it up again. Once he figures out qualifying, he's going to be a very formidable force in Moto2. There's no question. He's going from 13th to podiums. He's going from 17th on the grid, 17th to 2nd in the race on Sunday. The guy knows how to race a motorcycle. He's very, very fast. So at some point you have to look at him for a MotoGP seat. But we only ever talk about Ai Ogura in terms of MotoGP seats as it relates to Idemitsu Honda. Why are other teams not looking at him? Yes, there's built-in infrastructure. There's built-in chains. There's built-in ladders for Team Ducati, KTM, and obviously Honda Team Asia. That's where the relationships are. But Ai Ogura has left Honda Team Asia in Moto2. He's gone to the Boscoscura. He could go anywhere else. Yamaha is looking for a satellite team. Why wouldn't that make sense? Why wouldn't it make sense for them to look at a young upstart rookie like Ai Ogura and say, all right, we have Fabio Quartararo, factory Honda. Right now we have factory Yamaha. We have Alex Rins, factory Yamaha. Let's get a satellite team. Maybe we get someone like Miguel Oliveira. Maybe we get someone like Joan Mir. And then let's put a rookie in there to see what the rookie can bring as a different perspective. Let's put Ai Ogura on an independent Yamaha team. Why can't Ai Ogura go to an Aprilia team? So it's interesting to me sometimes how these feeders, we kind of forget to talk about some of these riders in context outside of the normal context. So yes, does Ai Ogura, I believe he fully has earned a MotoGP seat. He's been competitive in Moto2 longer than most riders have. We've seen riders like Aaron Canet kind of sit on the cusp of being really, really great in Moto2, and it hasn't quite materialized. He finally gets a win. He has a lot of podiums. Ai Ogura is one of those Moto2 riders that has just been there race after race. If he's healthy, he's riding at the front. And he's proving that yet again. He's having to battle through the grid, but he's proving yet again he deserves a look at. He deserves MotoGP to take a look at him. Whether or not he needs to be on a Japanese team, that can be argued by everyone else. I don't think that is necessarily a thing that needs to happen. Why can't KTM pick him up? Augusto Fernandez leaves Gas. Yes, a lot of people are expecting Jack Miller to move into the Gas team and Acosta to move up. But that does leave an open seat next to Jack Miller. Why couldn't Ogura ride a KTM? Why couldn't he be on the Gas team? Why does it have to be Honda Team Asia, Idemitsu? It could be anywhere. So as we go in deeper in the season, I'm really excited to watch and see what Ai Ogura can pull off in the Moto2 World Championship. Can he come from behind and start competing with the likes of Sergio Garcia, Joe Roberts, Fermin Aldeguer? Because that Boscoscura chassis seems to be working. And they finally have some very, very talented riders on it. So finally today, let's talk about the Indian Grand Prix, because we woke up today with headlines of the fact that the Indian Grand Prix for MotoGP in 2024, this season, may not happen. Now, a few weeks ago, they announced that the Kazakhstan Grand Prix was being delayed. There have been some flooding in Kazakhstan. They've used a lot of the emergency service. They've had to evacuate a ton of people. MotoGP said, listen, we can't go in there and stress the infrastructure more. We are delaying the Kazakhstan Grand Prix. And my initial reaction was, where? Where are they putting this Kazakhstan Grand Prix? Because it was already right smack dab in the middle of the summer break, and the end of the season is packed. Once you get into the flyaway section of this season, it is packed with triple headers, back-to-backs. There is so much racing. I think 11 races in the course of like 2.5 months. It's insanity. So I just thought the Kazakhstan Grand Prix is canceled. They're saying delayed to try to save a little face, but it's canceled. Well, news broke this morning that the Indian Grand Prix is the one that is likely to be canceled and to be replaced with the Kazakhstan Grand Prix. Now, that came out of left field for me. I'm not in the paddock week after week. I'm not hearing the murmurs, the behind the scenes. That was news to me in a big, fat way. And why is this happening? Why is the Indian Grand Prix in jeopardy of not happening? Well, I say in jeopardy because it hasn't been confirmed yet, but from what I've read this morning, it is all but confirmed that the Indian Grand Prix will not go forward. They are basically waiting for an arbitrary deadline so that they don't get sued for breach of contract. They are waiting for May 20th to make the official confirmation the Indian Grand Prix will not happen, but because of our deal with the promoter, they have this long to pay their debts, and then if they haven't done it, then we can go ahead and cancel that contract and not be held within breach of contract. So from what my understanding of this situation is that the Indian Grand Prix is already canceled. It just will be made official on May 20th. Now, why is it being canceled? Well, apparently the promoter that promoted the Indian Grand Prix is a company named Fair Street Motorsports or Fair Street Promotions. They have not paid their bills to many of the vendors, including Dorna. So when you're a promoter, when you're a ticket seller, and you've sold and promoted this event, you've held this event, you've taken money in from the ticket sales, you then have to pay your vendors. You have to pay the food vendors, you have to pay the parking guys, you have to pay all the people that made it possible that the Grand Prix happened in the first place. All those invoices you'll get now. So you sold 50, 60,000 tickets. I can't remember the attendance last year in India. You sold 50, 60,000 tickets, VIP packages, all these things. And now you're being invoiced from those companies that made it happen, and it's your responsibility to pay those invoices. Apparently, Fair Street has not paid those invoices, has not paid those vendors, including the big vendor, which is Dorna Motorsports, the parent company of MotoGP. They might be a vendor you'd consider paying very first if you're the promoter. Now, we all know concert promoters, event promoters, club promoters are basically the worst humans in the world. They gouge us buyers. They screw over the vendors every chance they get to hold on to every single penny they get. It's a very weird business. I don't understand why it has to be such a shit business and why people have to be horrible human beings to be in the club promotion, ticket promoter, ticket sales. Like, why does Ticketmaster and StubHub and all these places, like, why do they think they can charge 40% fees just to send an email back and forth? I don't know. They seem to be the worst kinds of humans in the world. And the fact that their company is called Fair Street, never trust any company that has fair or integrity in the name, because they're trying too hard. As we say with short men who drive very big pickup trucks, they're compensating for something. So Fair Street Productions should have been the first clue that some shit was going on over there. But now we have the potential for this Indian Grand Prix to not go forward because Fair Street has not paid their bills. They have not paid Dorna, and Dorna is not going to show up for free. The thing with MotoGP, it shows up into a town, it takes over the town for the weekend. They sell out every hotel room in the city, especially in some of these cities that are smaller markets. I'm not saying that New Delhi is a small market, it's a huge freaking place. But they come in, they take over the restaurants, the bars, the hotels, everything. They put a lot of money into the city. A lot is spent on transportation locally, especially with these flyaway races where the teams don't have their motorhomes and their trucks. They have to fly in and use local infrastructure for a lot of it, local shipping. A lot of money goes into the economy of these places. So Dorna is saying, listen, look at what we bring to you. We go to your country, we go to your city, we pack it with tourists, we pack it with fans, we sell lots of hot dogs. So we need our piece too. You don't get away with not paying Dorna. They're not showing up again, and that's what they're telling the Indian Grand Prix. We would love to come. The event was a massive success. They had some visa hiccups, if we remember a little bit from last year, but overall, the Indian Grand Prix was an amazing success. Very hot. I think that was the one where Jorge Martin fainted in Parc Ferme after the race. Very, very warm. Tough conditions for the riders, but a very successful Grand Prix. Is not going to happen this year because a promoter doesn't want to pay its bills. So instead, it looks like we'll be going to Kazakhstan after all. I had asked, where? You're delaying this race, where are you going to put it? And they seem to already know that answer. And that's why people like me and people on the outside and people on the internet can like curse and talk all we want into the ether. But there are people out there who know more than us. There are people who are on the inside looking out at us going, hey, calm down. We understand what we're doing. We can't release this news yet because there's more at stake than just your travel schedule. A lot of the media was so upset with Kazakhstan Grand Prix. Oh, they didn't let us know in time, and now my flight's not refundable. And when a company as big as Dorna has to release news to the press, they have to be 100% sure that's going to happen. They don't have the ability to retract that statement. A lot of independent journalists, people on TikTok, people on Reddit, we have the ability to retract a statement, to say something that's not factual or that's half factual, and then to come back later and go, hey, we were wrong about that. A company that's running this international motorsport program doesn't have the ability to retract a statement. They have to be right, especially when it comes to scheduling, when it comes to money, when it comes to these different announcements. You can't say, hey, we're canceling the Kazakhstan Grand Prix, and then come back 2 weeks later and go, actually, just kidding. It's going forward. It's fine. Everything's fine. We just panicked a little. Like when you release statement, there are meetings upon meetings that happen before things get released to the press. So I get a little annoyed with some people. Oh, I can't believe they're not letting us know, and they should have let me know first. I know we're all very, very self-centered people. We all think that we deserve the information before anybody else needs to get it. But the truth is these companies have to put out this stuff in an order that makes sense and in a way that they're not just reversing themselves a day later and causing utter chaos, internally and externally. So when they delayed the Kazakhstan Grand Prix, they knew this was cooking with India. They knew that, hey, we're not going to cancel the Grand Prix yet because if India doesn't pay their bills like we expect them not to, or Fair Street, let's not just put it all on India, Fair Street doesn't pay their bills like they're supposed to, the Indian Grand Prix is going to be canceled, and that's where Kazakhstan goes. They knew that math beforehand, and we're just waiting to catch us all up, which is what they did this morning when they dropped that news. So pretty massive news. It also goes to show you, like, there's more that goes in to running a motorsport company than just the racing, just the rules and the regulations and all these things. I know we focus on a lot of the racing aspects of this, but there's a big, fat piece of infrastructure that moves all over the world racing. It doesn't just happen out of thin air. It takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of logistics. And most of us aren't very good at big-time logistics. So that kind of wraps up this episode of Monday Morning MotoGP. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, 10 a.m. every Monday after a race weekend, we are right here on TikTok Live doing the Monday Morning MotoGP podcast. If you miss it, if you can't be here live with me on TikTok, it is then reposted in its entirety to YouTube. So make sure you're following me here. Like, follow, share, mash all the buttons here on TikTok, and then go over to YouTube, subscribe there so you get some long form content that you can't find on TikTok, as well as the full Monday Morning MotoGP podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. And now, let's do a little bit of chatting.